Welcome to the Owl's Edge, where smart gets wise. I'm your host, Susan Black-Beth, founder and managing partner of Auspicious Owl Group. On the Owl's Edge, we'll be bringing conversations, insights, and learnings about franchising and private equity out from behind closed doors and turn hard-earned experiences into your competitive advantage. Thanks for joining me. Let's swoop in and get wise. Welcome back to Aviary Studios. I'm your host, Susan Black-Beth, and this is the Owl's Edge. Today's guest is my pal, Christina Russell, and I specifically choose pal there instead of my distinguished friend or my dear friend, because we're going to get into some fun topics, personal and professional today with my pal, Christina. Christina Russell has built one of the most distinguished leadership journeys in franchising, starting as a multi-unit franchisee and going on to lead some of the industry's most influential brands as a CEO. Most recently, she led Radiance Holdings, the platform company behind Sola Salon Studios and Woodhouse Spas, supporting a network that empowers tens of thousands of independent beauty professionals across North America. Earlier, she served as CEO of Pure Barre, president of Camp Bow Wow, and held senior leadership roles at Curbs during its global expansion. Across every chapter of her career, Christina has been known for pairing disciplined growth with deep respect for the entrepreneurs who power franchising. Welcome, Christina.
No, thank you, Susan. It's so funny to sit here listening to you saying things like that. I look at you as my distinguished mentor through so many of these transitions, with all your knowledge and experience.
So here's where we'll start. You have worn many hats in the franchise world, as have I. So I want to start with, which role do you most identify with now at this chapter of your career? Do you still default think to being a franchisor? Do you default think as a franchisee? How do you most identify at this stage?
Wow, that's a great question. It's funny having so many years behind you and wearing so many hats over all of those years. I guess I find myself sometimes now reminiscing about the days of being a franchisee. And I think it's doing the work I do now with consulting, and you're looking under the hoods of brands and you're always looking to that unit level performance and trying to figure out what makes a brand tick. And you realize what's behind it. And I think that's what made me fall in love with the model. It's what I always loved about it was just the sort of, I don't know, entrepreneurial spirit that you see in the field and in the individual communities.
For many years, my default was franchisor. Like, that's just how I always thought. Now, after a decade on the investor side, it's almost like equal parts. Like, my brain kind of flashes between which of the hats I'm wearing. So I don't know that I have a natural default mode anymore. You and I have jokingly said, not so jokingly, that we are women of a certain age. And I want to give you a reassurance, girl, that I changed my estrogen patch today. So the hopes that I start crying and or sweating while we are on this podcast, hopefully are diminished. Risk mitigation.
You're trying to minimize the variables?
Yeah. I am. Risk mitigation. It's what we do around here. One of the things that I have always just loved and valued about you in every conversation that we've had, whether they're 3 minutes long or 3 hours long, is just your authenticity and that you lead as your genuine self. Share with me a lesson that you feel like you just had to learn through time.
As I navigated my career, is that this notion that you figured it out and you've arrived in the role and that's where you're going to be. That's not actually how most careers work anymore. And I think it hasn't for generations, but we still have that image that we're going to major in something in college and that's what we're going to do. And being able to navigate that, being able to ride the change in that, I think is super important, particularly in our field, which is franchising, because there is so much change.
As you are raising a daughter who is preteen at this point in time, like, and you look at her knowing what you know, what is something you just really hope for her career or her vocation choice?
I was the least likely to ever go into business. I had no mentorship for that. I grew up very poor. I didn't have a role model really about, even going to college, let alone going into business. And I sort of stumbled into it because my husband got the wild idea of starting a franchise. And he was the one that, learned about it and brought me the proposal to do a Curbs. And I was like, you're nuts. And back in the day, it turned out to be a really great business, and we were very successful with it. And I think that's where it's like, looking at what franchising did for us and giving us the opportunities we have to raise a little entrepreneur would make me really happy.
How amazing to just look out to the future and know that that opportunity is still going to be there, right? There's still going to be the
Yeah.
opportunity for the proverbial lemonade stand, because we're always going to be solving problems and gaps in offering and needs with people, which I just think is
100%.
super
And,
cool.
and it's interesting. I mean, I've lived most of my career, well, really all of my career in service brands. So I've done fitness, I've done spa, I've done hair services, I've done pets. And living through service brands, what you realize is that AI conversation is really different because those things are so high touch, they're so relational.
Mm.
And even though you see the press releases that in Japan they're trying to build the Optimus version that's going to give you the haircut, none of us want that. Our hairstylist is also our therapist, right?
Correct.
She's the person that knows everything about us, and we can just vent. And she loves to listen. And it's not something that Optimus will replace. Washing a dog, very high touch. Like there's not going to be a robot that can do that. And so I have this sort of faith that many things will survive AI, and it's not like the whole world is going to change. I think there is a lot that is going to change. I mean, heck, I use it for a lot of the work I do now to vet ideas and to help me organize thinking, and even to do some analysis work. And it's like, it's amazing what it can do, but it doesn't replace my ability to ask those right questions, to really think through where's the idea, where's the problem, all of that. And so I see that, and I see service, and I have faith that the human part is still going to matter by the time she's older.
Go with me a little bit on your journey of caring for your mom alongside your sister across the country while you're growing a brand, and going through some transactions and transitions. For our listeners out there who may be navigating life happening in some way, whether that is that they're now stepping in for elder care, or they have kiddos, or that maybe they're managing their own life happening for them personally, is there any guidance that you would share about how to stay centered through that and how to kind of keep the wheels on? And my journey too, but anything
Oh,
that you'd
yeah.
share with us from your perspective?
Wow. Yeah, you certainly have been through it too, Susan. I will say that a very dear friend of mine named Susan Black-Beth gave me some great advice at one point when I was asking her about career transition. And what you said to me was, you need to get really clear on your non-negotiables. And we were talking about things like, do you want to move to the Northeast? Because I'm such a sunshine girl. So Denver's, I can handle the cold because the sun's always out. If you could see it out that window, the sky's blue. But it was a great conversation about non-negotiables.
Agreed.
And one of those is to really be the glue that holds the family together. And that's not just the family that lives in your house, it's the family beyond that. And so when you are dealing with, both ends of that equation, with young children and with old aging parents, there's a lot to consider. And what I realized was non-negotiable for me was, I never wanted to look backwards and say that I regretted something about it. And one of the things that I've always done is I categorize my to-do list according to my values. And one of those values was always family. And I have to put family on there. And so when I would organize my to-do list every week, even when I had a company, my company to-do list I had to do on the computer. But when I did the process, I would also have the categories for my health and well-being, because if I'm not healthy and well, I'm no good to anybody. I would have the category for my family, my husband, my daughter, my mother, as a sister, as a friend, and think about the to-do items that I needed to do for those in that week. And it might be a text to someone, or a phone call, or just randomly sending a recipe to a friend I haven't talked to for a long time and asking her to come over and cook it for me, little things like that. But certainly as my mom aged, realizing that the tendency with Alzheimer's and diseases like that is to lean out. The tendency with friends like you who go through crisis with an illness in their family, or, things like that, is to lean away, because you don't have the emotional energy to lean in. But you have to make it non-negotiable for yourself to lean into those parts of your life that are going to matter more when you're my age than you realize. And I had a lot of great advice from friends when I found out I was pregnant. I asked them, what would you tell yourself that you can tell me now as somebody who wasn't expecting to be a mom? And what every single professional I talked to, most of them, their kids were, graduating high school or beyond, they would say, no matter what, make time, be there for the game, be there for the performance, be there to celebrate the graduation. Don't write that off. You have to make time to be there. And it doesn't mean that you can't still do the things that you need to do career-wise, but you have to be very intentional about how your time is structured so that it doesn't get sucked up by your company.
When you look at businesses now, having been both the day-to-day operator and in an advisory board capacity, like what are the 2, 3, I don't care, call them out, key components of a franchise system that make you go, that they got it?
I almost segment the franchise world into two columns. And I look at, on the one side, there's food. There's so much that happens on the food side. And on the other side, there's service. And for me, my sweet spot has always been service. And I think why I gravitate towards that is that I get excited about the content of a brand. I really get excited about what is the brand doing? What are they setting out to do? And what really makes it different? And so you look at a brand like Curves back in the day, they invented boutique fitness, but really beyond that, they invented like boutique franchise concepts. It didn't exist before then. But then you have to step back and look at it. And this is really where the learnings came from that first franchise role. If the unit economics don't work, it doesn't matter how sexy the mission is. It doesn't matter. And so often I think franchisees get, excited about a mission, but they don't know how to ask those questions. And I think that's where the best franchisors have figured this out before they try to sell. And I think there's a lot more sophisticated support now for franchisees so they don't make that mistake. But you need to go in and really look at it as a franchisee and ask yourself, what am I investing? How quickly am I going to pay that back? What does AUV look like? How consistent is ramp across that system? And it's really hard to see. Being on the side that I am now, where I'll help a private equity brand actually vet a franchise concept, that's really what I'm looking for. So I look at things like variance in performance, because you can get really excited about these top performers that are just, shooting the moon, and not notice this, bottom 15 or 20% that maybe aren't doing so well. If you don't ramp to a level that is sustainable within that first year, typically you have this nice ramp that then flattens out. And wherever it flattens out, then your growth becomes more incremental from there. And it can be really, really tough. But brands that understand how to manage that ramp consistently, how to get the AUV really consistent in terms of revenue, but then also are looking at that P&L, those are the ones that are going to last.
You talked a little bit about growth, and you said about Curves getting to 10,000 units and that it's not always the most stable when you grow at that pace. From your experience, what are some of the operational constraints around growth? Because clearly when investors, private capital investors come into the franchise space, most often we're looking to grow, right? So what are some of the franchisor operational constraints that say, we got to slow our roll here. We're not ready for this sort of exponential growth?
The driver consistently seems to be is that we take our eye off the ball operationally. And it means a lot of things. The most, measurable thing that will matter is the performance of the individual units, because we're so focused on franchise development that we're not investing in operations the way that we should be. And suddenly franchisees that were seeing the incremental growth, they'd reach maturity, and we're still seeing that incremental growth, ideally over, 10% a year. We're doing great. And all of a sudden they're not. And if you don't catch that soon enough, you don't know, and you're not out there focusing on those relationships, and you don't know, then they pull back even on development. So it can impact the development side of it as well, generally because you've got something going on at the unit level that isn't performing the way that it should. And it's because you took your eye off the prize. And, you look at a brand like Curves that grew too quickly. It was like a rocket ship. Like there was nothing like it, because it hit the right need in the right market at the right time. But at a time when those owners hit a maturity level, they didn't have the support they needed. They didn't have operations at all. And so you had a brand that, it was such a simple model. It was going to be easy. It's going to be fine. And everything was done through contract mentors that helped you with a grand opening, and then bye-bye. It didn't work. And so they realized that at a certain point in that brand, but by then they were already seeing closures while they were still on this rocket ship of openings. And that's when they started putting in operations. And as an iteration of that in gosh, don't remember, 2008-ish, they brought me into head of operations. So it was an interesting thing to walk into because you're essentially triaging closure while you're managing openings.
Right.
And what was the secret to doing that? Well, it was going back and getting together with the franchisees and really understanding what was going on in their business and gathering that P&L level data, not just the revenue data, to understand what is causing this. Is it an expense issue? Is it a pricing issue? Things that are really hard to adapt and change when you have 10,000 franchisees. It's not an easy thing to do.
It's a big shift.
So I think it's really looking at, operationally, what is happening at the unit level. But then beyond that, the secondary piece is if there's a struggle happening and you've lost it, it may even be a development struggle. It may be that they don't have the courage to sign a lease for some reason. So can they get financing at the rates that they want? And are they struggling to get that financing for second units? So if your growth is dependent on these kinds of things, sometimes a franchisee is not going to say, I'm scared,
right?
Because that's embarrassing. Like, you don't want to talk about being scared. You may be successful in units 1, 2, and 3, and you're supposed to open 4, 5, and 6, and you have this fear of signing the lease. Well, you're not going to know that as a franchisor unless you are out in the field. And I will say what I've seen just in the short period of time that I have been out of executive leadership, running a brand as a CEO, is this movement away from doing area meetings on a regular pulse. So in the pandemic, we all got in this habit of doing things on Zoom. And I will tell you, it is not the same. I go back to this word analog all the time. At some point, that's another book I've got in my mind. I've got a few books in mind, but one of them is to really talk about analog process and understanding how that fits side by side with the digital world, because that analog piece of area meetings is somewhat magical, where you get the franchisees in a room, depending on the size of the brand. It may be 10 people at a table, it may be 50 people at a table. And it's not fancy. You've got the sandwiches you brought in from some other franchise brand to feed your franchise
supporting
brand.
our brethren.
Yeah. And basically you're sitting there with their printed out KPI report on the desktop and looking at where are the spikes and the valleys in the data right now? What are you struggling with? What's consistent? What's idiosyncratic to you? And what can we learn from each other? And I have a process that I do when I do meetings like that I call worries, wins, and words. And I would start every meeting with that. What are you most worried about? Where are we winning individually and as a brand? And what words would you use to describe how you feel about your franchise today?
Oh, that's amazing.
And so you do this, and it takes a while. And when I've done this with teams, they'll say, oh my gosh, well, that's going to take up an hour of our agenda. And I tell them it may be the most important hour of the agenda because it's the one where we're listening.
Correct.
We're listening. We're listening to what they're saying. And they will tell you everything you need to know. And if you're doing this in a regular pulse throughout your brand and you're out in the field and you make your executive team go with you, they don't have to go to all of them.
Yep.
But as a CEO, I went on the whole road show because at the end of the day, all those decisions are going to roll up to me. And I'm the one that's going to have to make those decisions. And if I don't know from the people that matter the most, what's on their minds, where are we winning? What are you worrying about? Then I'm not worrying and winning in the right places. I'm not looking at the right perspective. So I would make my executives go, and sometimes they resist that. And, even with the PE firms, sometimes it's helpful for them to go, sometimes it's not. And I know a lot of the PE wants to go, but it does change the dynamic in the room. It
surely does.
Because what franchisees know is that PE is going to come and go. When PE comes, I always recommend, come as a listener. Really come as a background to that and really listen the same way your leadership team is listening, and take the feedback back, because that's where you're going to really start to understand why perhaps the executive team of that company is making recommendations that they're making. That analog piece, that human connection where you're really hearing what they're saying, things they're never going to put in an email, things where someone's going to share something and then other people are going to feel confident to open up about that. It's you have to make it a judgment-free zone where they can literally tell you anything and be critical of us. We're tough, we can take it, and if we don't know, we can't fix it.
Boy, I felt my heart rate kick up there, talking about right, just those honest conversations. And when my PE buddies call me and we're discussing a certain leader, if they're looking to make a hire, that I always say is make sure that this is somebody that knows how important it is to be in the field. Like we
Yes.
have to be sitting in our offices, while that may feel like the right decision from an investor's mindset, from a franchise operator mindset, you have to go break bread. You
Yes.
have to go be with these folks who did, roll their 401k, put a second mortgage on the house, all of those things. We got to go be with them. It's some of that empathy and compassion that we talked about. From your perspective, what will differentiate the private equity firms who are going to consistently win as investors in the franchise space versus those who may experience more churn with lower returns on their investment?
It's really understanding the human element at every level. And it's a hard thing, I know, for private equity. It's funny when I got braver as a CEO leading in PE and felt that I could be a little more candid with the folks that were purchasing companies and doing things that I didn't fully understand yet. I had this realization that I had never really thought about before. You grow in your career. I grew from franchisee all the way up through operations and was leading operations and became a president of Camp Bow Wow and then CEO. And you think every one of those stages, like, you're going to be the boss, you're going to be the boss, now you're the boss. And what you realize as you get to the CEO level is that you still have a boss. You're not actually the boss. Your boss is a private equity firm, and you think they don't have a boss. But I had this epiphany at a stage in my career where I realized they actually do have a boss, and their boss is a really hard boss. And there's not a whole lot of human in that boss. It's everything where it's contract and agreement and expectation. And that boss is their investor. And so, I remember asking, one of the investors one time, do you have a boss? And his answer was, I actually do. And it's the sovereign wealth of a small country. And I thought,
Yep.
wow, like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's not trivial. I asked another one and he said it's the retirement fund for an entire state government.
Yep.
Wow, that's a big deal. So these private equity firms are trying to satisfy investors in the same way that I, as a CEO, am trying to satisfy that private equity firm. And meanwhile, behind me is a lot of humanity. And I think those private equity firms that come into franchising in particular have to understand that, unlike most other businesses, that humanity is not a humanity that we get to manage in an HR sense. It's a humanity that we have to manage as human beings because they make decisions. That having that person on your team that can fly out and drive a territory with them and say to them, yes, I think this location is going to be successful. It doesn't just matter for that franchisee who's a 2-unit owner that has the second mortgage on their house. It also matters for that large investor who's on unit 20 and still needs somebody to give them that confidence. Like, this one's not going to be a mistake. Is it? I've done it. I don't want to make that mistake. They need that human touch. They need that human element. Likewise, the teams, because they are high EQ teams, they need that human element as a leadership team from their CEO. And so what you're going to have to prioritize as a CEO that isn't necessarily like you as a private equity investor, because what you deal with is something that is much less analog than that, much less high contact than that. And so you have to understand that this person that's going to be a successful leader of a franchise brand does have that EQ component of their personality and is going to be bringing that to you and talking to you about values, talking to you about the things that are less tangible, but that really matter in terms of the success of that brand. And I think if PE firms can let that bloom and blossom the way that it always has in franchising to make franchises successful, they're going to be much better off in the long run.
Rapid fire. One question every franchisee should ask before signing.
What I would ask the franchisor, what was the biggest franchisee fail? Why did it happen? And what did you do about it? And I would want to listen to their answer. And I think what you would get in a lot of cases is they would blame the franchisee. Oh, they were undercapitalized. They had no leadership experience. That would be a red flag to me. I want to hear, because they picked that franchisee.
Mm-hmm.
They set that franchisee up for success by letting them in. I want to hear what they learned about it and what they did about it to support that franchisee and to let them exit with dignity. That's what I want to hear about.
I talk a lot about how we say so much how franchising is really powerful on the front end as that first 12 or 18 months in business. I have seen it have so much power on the exit side for a franchisee as well. Even when things maybe don't end exactly how we wanted them to, that exiting with dignity. Again, it's a whole nother topic. Most common private equity mistake in franchising.
It's the first year bias that you panic. The private equity firm will panic if things don't go the way they expected in the first year. And I think that you feel that, and you feel the tension around it. You understand why it's there. But I think it's getting them to take a deep breath and realize that it's a change management exercise sometimes, learning how to work together.
Yep.
So don't panic and think that the solution is to, install a new team. Take a beat and figure out what can you do to actually, slow things down just enough to get the ship righted and then goose that engine again.
Most critical metric that isn't given enough weight or given enough value in franchising.
I would say from outsiders. Insiders get it. I would say outsiders, it's consistency. It's 100% consistency. So if you're looking at the metric of, is this brand healthy? Look at performance variance, look at ramp variance, like you were talking about, look at cohort variance. If, one year cohort is performing different than another, and then look at unit variance, like is there consistency in the field? Because one of the hardest things to do in franchising is refresh and get a brand all pointed the same direction. I know you've been through it. I've been through it.
Yep.
Really tough to navigate. So if you're looking at coming into a brand, that consistency piece, I think, matters more than sometimes people think.
What's something that's not on your resume that you're really proud of?
It's the not quantifiable piece of my resume that may or may not matter, but I think it really is looking at the balance of life and career for myself and my team. I mean, I've talked about, my balance of my mom with Alzheimer's and my 11-year-old daughter who, has grown up through this journey. I mean, I had her right after I stepped in as president of Camp Bow Wow. So she's ridden the whole ride. But I think beyond that, it was taking those lessons on my own and really understanding what mattered most to me, and then doing that for my team, really putting in the things that people needed. I mean, we were hybrid before hybrid was cool. We were alternative work schedule before alternative work schedule was cool. We put in paid maternity leave for our team for both men and women because we cared. And even though it was scary because we had a young staff that was all childbearing years at Radiance, it meant so much to those people to be able to take that 12 weeks with pay and spend time with their newborn baby. And so I'm really proud that I was able to live my values in the way that I managed those companies, despite all of those challenges, and to honestly set the example for the next generation of leaders by doing that. And I think it's something that perhaps women bring to the table as leaders that's undervalued. And I think it has the potential to change the world in a lot of positive ways. So I'm proud to have been able to do the small things I did.
I'm proud of you too. Looking to the future, open mic for you to operators, investors, leaders, open microphone. What do you want to say, or what would you like to send us off on?
Oh gosh, well, I will say it just feels really good to be back and active in franchising. I needed that year to spend with my mom, but getting back and starting to step into boards, doing the work I'm doing with the IFA Foundation is amazing. And being a part of the Ascension Initiative, where you're bringing people who otherwise wouldn't have the support to get into it. And I'm doing local charity work that has sort of some adjacency to that that's really cool, of helping people in underrepresented populations really find that pathway to the American dream. And I just love it. But what I'm specifically hoping for is to get deeper involved with boards. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing with Centhound, and I've got a couple of other opportunities I'm working on right now. But I would love to have the opportunity to be someone who can help private equity get into franchising in a way that makes sense for them, for some fantastic exits, but also makes sense for franchising generally to continue this amazing sector that you and I both have benefited so much from.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to help us move from being smart to being wise. That comes with years of experience and just sometimes getting our teeth kicked in a little bit, and also moving from having worries to having wins. I really, really love that. And I will absolutely take that away from this call as you mentioned it. I'm Susan Black-Beth. Thank you so much for joining us live from Aviary Studios. We're signing off. Thanks for joining me on the Owl's Edge. If you found this conversation enlightening, please share it with others who influence outcomes for franchise stakeholders.
To explore more on the topics of franchising and private equity, visit us at auspiciousowlgroup.com and be sure to follow The Owl's Edge wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, be smart, be wise.